This is my seventh year in Silicon Valley, and I've never seen so many engineers being laid off. Well, in fact, we haven't seen any engineering layoff for probably over a decade. Right now, those companies say the economy is the reason. The economy is not doing well. We have to reduce spending. That's why we lay off all those engineers. They're implying that when the economy recovers, well, the economy always recovers eventually, they will go back to hire more engineering talent in the US. But is this true? Or do we believe engineers probably going to be hired elsewhere? Those companies are going to leverage more remote engineering talent, and maybe Silicon Valley will not be Silicon Valley. This is a scary question, but I kind of felt like we need to have a conversation about it. So I have a conversation with Jonathan Stars, the CEO of Turing. So they're one of the fastest growing company that's still really going strong in today's economy because they help company hire remote engineering talent. And we're really talking about what does remote means for company, what is the long-term solutions going to be, and what makes talent. So it could be a really interesting conversation. I hope you enjoy it. If you like the video, please subscribe. I'm just getting started, so that means a lot to me. Thank you. This is Xiaoyan. Today I have a really good friend, but also a entrepreneur that I really admire, Jonathan, which is the CEO of Turing.com. Thank you so much for joining, Jonathan.
Thank you, Xiaoyan, for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Maybe we can start by just explaining to people what is Turing.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Jonathan Sudhar, CEO and co-founder of Turing. So Turing offers the world's most deeply vetted developers and teams matched by AI. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. We believe that traditional recruiting as we know it is over. And traditional recruiting wasn't really built for hiring software engineers in a software first world. If you look at traditional recruiting, like whether it's working with agencies or a labor marketplace or IT services companies, three big problems. It's super slow. And most of them do very shallow vetting, like meaning to find one engineer, you have to interview 30 people. So super time consuming. And most of those solutions are very geo limited. You don't get to tap into the global talent pool. You get to tap into a very limited talent pool. So we asked ourselves, can we solve this with a software first talent cloud? What if you could push a button to spin up your engineering dream team just as easily as you'd spin up servers on AWS? What if you had AI powered vetting and matching? And what if you had automated controls for productivity, security, compliance, etc. after the match when you're working with your remote team? So this is why we built Turing.
So you started the company in 2018. That's before COVID, right? Did you see COVID coming when you started the company?
No, if I did, it would have made for a good Bond movie later. It would have been something like a Bond movie villain would do. And it's been super humbling, Xiaoyan. Like when we started the company, we believed in the future of remote work and distributed teams. We believed that there's untapped human potential all over the world, and our mission is to unleash the world's untapped human potential. And when we started, some people didn't believe. Like there were these companies like GitLab and I believe Zapier and a few others that were distributed, but they felt much more like the Rebel Alliance in sort of Star Wars terminology. But I think once COVID hit, it accelerated the world's shift to remote work and distributed teams. And we've definitely benefited from the tailwinds around remote work and the tech industry. Most recently, we became a unicorn last year and most recently had raised at a 4 billion valuation cap. And all of that happened. All of that happened, I think, because of I feel like the future of remote work got sped up by at least 4 to 5 years. And your company too, I think, does.
We benefited too, yeah.
Yes. I think virtual events have become the norm. We are realizing so many more things that we thought needed to be done in person can just be done just as well, sometimes even better when you have the scale and benefit of a remote distributed team. True for engineering, true for marketing, and true for many other areas.
So what convinced you in 2018 when people probably will say that's a niche, it's not going to be mainstream, Microsoft won't do this, or Google won't do this. What convinced you to start a company then?
Yeah. So for me, what did it was actually my experience in my first startup. So Turing is my second company. My first company was a machine learning based content recommendation company that I started with my co-founder Vijay while we were at grad school at Stanford. And my first company went through an interesting journey. It was a 10-year journey, and I feel like in the first 4 or 5 years, I made every mistake a typical first-time founder would make. I did all of that, all the boxes checked, and it was 2012, and I remember the year distinctly, which was the moment when I thought my company was actually going to fail. And until then, I hadn't even considered the possibility that I could fail. I was so confident. And we were growing very fast. We had about 40 million users, and I was about to raise our Series A. And every VC I met on Sand Hill Road turned us down at the time because they were looking for traction on mobile, and we didn't have mobile traction.
Oh.
So I needed to hire mobile engineers fast. And I remember at the time looking around Silicon Valley and all the usual places like Google, Facebook, Apple for great iOS, Android talent. They were super hard to hire, costly to bring on board. And I remember late nights at 11 p.m., like trying to convince these engineers to come and join, and it was just very hard. And my co founder and I at the time realized that if we did not think differently about how we were going to build our engineering team, the company was going to. And it was a moment of truth. And at that time, we made the decision to look beyond Silicon Valley for Silicon Valley caliber talent. And this was 2012. And I was fortunate to work with some incredible engineers from Poland, Ukraine, Serbia, China, and India. They joined the company. We launched V1 of our iOS app. Apple featured it in the front page of the App Store under Best Apps for Content Recommendations. Apple loved the app. They invited us to
Oh, wow.
Cupertino. We made some of those best app lists by Apple, and
Uh-huh.
that attracted the eye of some investors. We raised our Series A, and the company had a successful acquisition afterwards. And when I think back to what made my first company successful, I keep going back to that moment in time in 2012 when it was a pretty key decision to think beyond San Francisco to San Jose as where you hire engineers from. Don't get me wrong, Silicon Valley still has great engineering leaders, great talent, but I think it's a mistake to restrict your hiring radius to whoever happens to live near your office, right? I think you should look for great people wherever they exist and wherever they live. And that was that moment. That was the moment of inception for Turing. After selling the company, I took some time off in 2017, and I teamed up with my co-founder again, and we were thinking about what we wanted to build next. And we kept going back to, okay, what made the first company successful was really solving engineering, hiring, and building engineering teams at scale in a efficient yet high quality producing way, right? It not only was it super efficient, it was actually the best approach, and that was the genesis for Turing.
We were thinking about the same thing when we first started a company, but then we got some pushbacks. People say, "Oh, that's going to be really hard for the culture fit,"
Yes.
or it's going to be bad communication between engineering and sales team. How do you address that concern?
Yeah, the way we think about it is, I think those are all fair concerns. I think soft skills, culture fit, communication, these are all important. Today, Xiaoyan, at Turing, we have more than 400 wonderful companies building on top of us. These include big companies like Amazon, Volvo, Johnson& Johnson, Reddit, OpenAI, and others. And many of those companies have the same concerns, like how do you solve for soft skills, communications, so on, and culture fit. And the way to solve it is to first write down what it is that you want to vet for. And at Turing, we actually have automated tests that vet for, let's pick one of those. Let's pick communication. If you ask 10 engineering managers, like, what's the biggest obstacle to remote teams or distributed teams, eight of them will say communication. And if you drill down deeper, what do you mean by communication? Those eight of them will give you probably eight different reasons for what they mean when they say communication.
Yeah.
So at a very base level, there is English proficiency, English communication. Like you want maybe people to be able to contribute in a high bandwidth brainstorm conversation. So obviously, excellent written, verbal, and comprehension skills are important. And at Turing, we vet for that as well. Obviously, the bar for an engineer for written communication is not that high. You have to communicate productively on Slack and Jira and GitHub, and you don't have to give a speech. You don't have to be Steve Jobs. The bar is not that high. The bar for technical skills is high, but not so much for written communication beyond a certain point. But there is other soft skills around communication, like expectation setting and how good you are at pushing back against ambiguity or unrealistic deadlines. So we want to make sure, like, how good are you at stakeholder management? Particularly in a distributed team, the bar for communication is super high. Are you the kind of engineer who will communicate quickly when there is a diff between today and yesterday? Maybe you thought a certain timeline was achievable, and today that you've discovered some blocker. Do you proactively communicate, or are you going to be quiet and then let your manager know when you're very close to the wire? So there are all these soft skills that you have to assess. And we've created some personality-based tests and some situational case study-based tests to check how good an engineer is at communicating and parsing ambiguity. And ambiguity is also this weird thing where in some cases, you want an engineer to clarify something that's ambiguous and make that more precise, and not, you want them to block on it. Whereas in some other cases, you don't want them to block on it. You want them to make the relevant decisions themselves. So you have to solve for that. So we've spent a lot of time studying communication, especially as it relates for engineers like ICs, tech lead managers, directors of engineering. Obviously, as you go higher up, the bar for communication goes up. So we figured out ways to evaluate it, assess it, and in some cases, give them feedback and guide them and coach them to get better at it, which solves some of those use cases. And we also ask our customers what they're looking for. For example, if Run the World is looking for an engineer, and we would ask you, Xiaoyan, what does it take for an engineer to be successful at Run the World? You might have your own specific criteria, and we try to figure out a scalable way to vet engineers based on that. So we create custom tests based on, for example, you might tell me that we would like engineers to think like an owner, or not need to be micromanaged, to work in a much more autonomous way. And then we could figure out good ways to do some vetting beyond the default Turing vetting to have them be a fit for you.
Interesting. So that reduces the amount of screening that I have to do, right? If I'm a company.
That's exactly right.
Most of the screening. I see.
That's exactly right, Sharon. Like, we would love for you to not have to do any interviews at all. And we trust our vetting so much that we give our customers a 2-week trial period where we tell them, work with our engineers for 2 weeks. If for any reason things don't work out, you can stop, you still pay zero, and we would pay the developer. And you can think of that entire 2-week period as a working interview. And we expose the results of our vetting to you so that you can see how the developer was coding in our assessment of their coding abilities, how they answered certain questions, what questions they got right, what questions they got wrong. Not only do we want to be the company that does the deepest vetting, but also the most transparent, so that know who you're working with.
That makes sense. That changed things a little bit. I remember when I work at Facebook, for example, like there are certain keywords that they're looking for. And there are also certain past companies. You used to work at Facebook, used to work at Amazon, or you went to Stanford, went to Berkeley. Do you think those keyword universities you went to, the past company you've been, what was your title? Do you think those things are less relevant now that you have a different type of vetting system?
Absolutely. We think they are less relevant, and they actually stand in the way of building a high quality, diverse team. And the wonderful thing about Turing is there are about 340,000 software engineers in Silicon Valley today, 341,000. And there are 27 million software developers in the world.
How many? 23 million?
27 million.
Wow.
And it's incredible to think how much human progress we've seen from this relatively small pool of people working in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And you're imagining how much faster would civilization progress if that other 27 million had access to the same opportunity that people in Silicon Valley take for granted. And these are engineers from, including like Mississippi, Kansas, North Carolina, and other parts of the world. And the one blocker for many of these incredible people is if you look at their resume. And there's this one wonderful engineer who now works with Rivian, one of our customers. He's one of the best Node backend developers that we've ever seen. But and he's from Colombia, Bogota in Colombia. But if you look at his LinkedIn or his resume, you won't see Stanford. You won't see Stanford, Berkeley. You won't see Google, Facebook, Stripe, or any companies that you'd recognize in his prior work experience. And it's a shame that people like that would typically get overlooked. You can't assess their work experience. You can't rely on these superficial shortcuts. And this is where Turing has the biggest value to add, because we evaluate them deeply based on their actual skills. If it's a backend developer, we assess their computer science foundations, their expertise in specific tech stacks, systems design, behavioral questions, and we help the world benefit from their untapped human potential.
That's really interesting. So I guess right now there are a lot of companies in Silicon Valley are laying off engineers, right? And then they claim that's the recession is the cause of it. It sounds like from your description, they could just hire in Colombia, and even when the economy is good, getting better, they don't hire in Silicon Valley anymore. Do you think would that be your prediction from the higher market here?
I can't predict the future, but the thing that I think will happen is, at the end of the day, the world that we live in moves forward because of technology. Right? Our lives get better because there are wonderful products that get built every day. wonderful drugs that get invented every day. And the what is powering all of that technological progress is software. At the end, almost every company is a software company today. And what is powering all of those software companies is access to great engineers and great engineering talent. And I think this, who knows how long this recession, I don't know if you're even calling it a recession, but let's call it a recession.
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. or Xiaoyan and Jonathan could call it right now. Yes, but who knows whether it's a recession or not. But I think I'm very bullish on the future of tech and the future of the software industry over the long time frame. And I think it's a wonderful time for companies to build. And I'm sure there could be some short term pain for people hiring. Companies may have to become more efficient. And if the push towards efficiency makes companies hire from a broader talent pool than just San Francisco to San Jose, that may not be a bad thing. There's wonderful people all over the US, all over the world, who I think will have access to more opportunity than they did in the.
But how about salaries? Right now, like for example, Google, they pay you differently based on where you are. In a perfect market, you would assume that shouldn't be the case. Do you think eventually all the engineers in the world get paid the same?
So I'm sure some fancy Stanford, Harvard economist would have more interesting things to say about what will happen to global wages, global compensation. I think what will happen is people will start to get compensated more fairly because their market is about to expand. Before Turing existed, the kind of engineers that we have on Turing had access to maybe 2 or 3 companies in their city. Now there are thousands of companies looking for people just like them, and that's good for them. They're going to be able to command higher wages, higher compensation. Like on average, I mean, like people who come to Turing, they make 20 to 30% more money than they were previously making. And it matches my own personal experience as well. I grew up in Chennai in India, and I remember in Chennai, like there used to be 2 software companies. So it doesn't matter how smart you were, like whether you were first in class or where you were, you could, if you wanted to stay in Chennai, like you would probably just work for those 2 companies, one of those 2 companies. One of them was Symantec, like the antivirus company. The other company,
Yeah.
I don't even remember its name. And that was it. And to me, like it was not a great situation, like where I grew up admiring companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, etc. And if I wanted to build a company like that or contribute or work at a company like that, I had to basically relocate and come to. So I went to Stanford for grad school and did all of that. So I relocated to where the jobs were. I imagine a future where the next iteration of probably doesn't have to relocate. Probably there is a future version of me that stays in Chennai and has the same, if not bigger, impact than me in Portola Valley today. And I think that future is good for the world overall. Like I think opportunity will be more equally distributed. There will be local communities will benefit more. Today, unfortunately, Chennai probably doesn't benefit as much from me as does Palo Alto or Portola Valley. And so that may not be an altogether bad thing.
But then what do you think the positioning of Silicon Valley will be?
I think Silicon Valley is a mindset and it is a culture, right? And you, Xiaoyan, you've built a wonderful team in China. And I would say that 5 years from now, as Run the World becomes huge, all of those engineers are going to have wonderful experience to start their own companies, from their lessons learned working for a Silicon Valley company, which is Run the World. And there'll be future founders from your company. There'll be future leaders from your company. Today, some of the biggest blockers to people hiring from other parts of the US, other parts of the world is they keep saying, oh, there are not enough experienced engineers there. If you want experienced talent, you have to look in Silicon Valley. Experience exists only when people are given the opportunity to get their foot in the door and keep growing. 5 years from now, there are going to be like experienced engineers in China, experienced engineers in LATAM, Africa, Europe, Asia, thanks to companies like Turing and companies like Run the World that work with talent wherever they are located. So I think Silicon Valley is going to spread out all over the US and all over the planet. We're going to have a ton of jobs created all over the world. And I think we're going to enter the golden era of remote work. And it's going to be wonderful. I think the way I think about it is, if you think about it in terms of GDP per engineer, and again, I'm not an economist, so I'm sure the economists in your audience will be upset with my framing. But if you look at GDP per engineer, a ton of wealth has been created thanks to the hard work of maybe 340 plus engineers in Silicon Valley and their teams who might be global. What could happen if if that 340,000 became an order of magnitude more or two orders of magnitude? I think the world will just be so much better. And people in Silicon Valley, I think, will be able to enjoy the benefits of a non-crowded commute on the 101 and being able to buy bigger and bigger houses. Maybe the real estate market will also come down in Silicon Valley.
Well, hopefully, you mean like they're the one owning they're the one starting companies, and then they can hire internationally. That's why, yeah.
Correct.
But some pushback I heard. Just play the devil's advocate. It's more just like this may work for individual contributors, engineers. This will not work for executives who need to culturally adapt. What's your thoughts on that? Have you seen executives hiring happening already?
So Turing's exec team is already distributed. We have execs in San Francisco, we have execs in New York, we have execs in Denver, in India and Germany. So we are distributed. It is tough. It is tough. It is definitely tough. But remote does not mean that you don't meet at all. So we've been very intentional about having offsites every quarter where we bring the exec team together, spend a couple of days together, and we have other smaller meetups that happen frequently. So we have the benefits of working together in person. If the question is about Silicon Valley is still the best place to hire execs and senior leaders, I think there is truth to that. I think Silicon Valley and New York do have a density of more senior leadership talent, but it's only a matter of time. The reason that talent exists is that talent grew up at Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and a few companies like that over the last decade or so. As companies like Turing run the world and many other companies, today we have Amazon, Volvo, Johnson, all these companies hiring senior people. As those people mature and grow their careers over the next few years, I think we'll start to see more senior leaders in other parts of the world too. They just need the opportunity to climb that ladder, right? And the only way you climb the ladder is by putting in the years at a company where you can learn from great managers and great execs. And as the world goes towards distributed teams, like many wonderful leaders are already on that career trajectory. So I predict that we'll see more and more leaders, more and more execs outside of Silicon Valley in the coming years, and the gap will start to close.
And you think you give it 5 years, 3 years? How long do you think that will happen?
I would give it like 5 to 10 years, like for us to find C-suite, V-suite level talent in many parts of the world. And I think it'll take 5 to 10 years.
Okay, that makes sense. Changing gears a little bit, there's a debate over return to office versus hybrid working versus whatever, remote working entirely. I already know your views. I'm assuming I know your views, but what is your view on that, especially on the return to office hybrid debate?
So let's maybe have a thought experiment. Let's say there is an executive that you want to hire. There are two companies looking to hire that executive. There is one company that says, hey, Miss Executive, same role, same compensation, but I need you in the office every day, Monday to Friday. You have to commute like an hour, like both ways. And you have to come to the office every day, spend 9 to 5 here, go back, work. Let's say one company says that. And then there's another company that and the company says you have to live in San Francisco or Palo Alto. You have to live between 30 minutes from the office. We don't want you to commute like an hour or so. You have to stay 30 minutes from the office, and we are based in Palo Alto, so please stay somewhere between San Francisco to San Jose. And there's another company that tells the same executive, hey, it's the same role, same compensation. You're here because we value your skills and we value your potential and your ability to contribute. We don't care where you live. You can live wherever you like. We'll give you resources to meet as needed. Like you can meet with your team as often as you need. We have a co-working space that you can come and meet with your team as often as you like. We have periodic meetups in the company too, where you can meet and collaborate. But we trust you to manage your time appropriately. And of course, we need overlap with the exec team, so we're going to make sure that happens. And you can decide when you want to. The philosophy is work from home, meet as needed, right? And the company will reimburse you for travel. Now, which company do you think this exec is going to join? And
I think from a recruiting standpoint, that they're going to join the more flexible one. But the counter argument will be more on the collaboration side. Once they join, can they be as productive as the other person? What's your thought on that?
Correct. And I think the way to solve that is to have periodic meetups on a structured cadence, and the company has to be intentional about how you bring people together in person. Excellent async first culture with writing things down. And this is stuff you anyway have to be good at, even if you are running an office based company. But remote just raises the bar for that. I think the best way to operate to be remote first with excellent support for in-person meetups. You're intentional about bringing specific teams together, specific functions together on a structured cadence. For example, I have our exec team meet actually twice a quarter. Once for board meetings, once for what we call a QUIP, which is a quarterly in-person meetup. We spend a couple of days together. And we have a culture where we try to do quite a few one-on-ones in person. Like I have one-on-ones in person in Palo Alto, in San Francisco, sometimes in New York. And I think that's the way to operate. I literally have execs who tell me that they for them, the Turing being remote first was a huge positive in choosing to work at Turing. And these are people who work super hard, and we have a performance first culture. So people at Turing work really hard. They're very driven, ambitious. And I found that if you can be remote first, be distributed while retaining that performance oriented culture, you have an unfair advantage. Sometimes I see some distributed teams have a slightly more lax culture on a performance basis. I think you do have to correct for that. But if you can solve for that, I think it's an unfair advantage for recruiting, which makes it an unfair advantage for execution.
So for you guys, the structure is typically once every other month or once every quarter instead of 2 days a week, right?
Correct. So we don't have we are more than 500 people. And we are globally distributed across many countries, many time zones, and different teams have different protocols for time zone overlap. They all figure out a time zone overlap that works for them. Typically, it's 4 to 6 hours, and we try to make sure different functions that need to be co-located on a time zone basis are co-located. For example, our sales team has a pretty high time zone overlap. Of course, we have sales teams attacking the East Coast, attacking the West Coast. So they may have different overlaps again. But my philosophy is one of like horses for courses, right? It's not a one size fits all ideological approach. It's
You're more practical.
More practical, like with the needs of the business, right? Like we just care about creating business value, and we do whatever it takes to organize ourselves in a way that maximizes business value. And that's our approach.
Let's talk about you. You seem practical. Were you always this practical? You're a serial entrepreneur. That practicality is that a very important attribute for you in the past?
In some ways, yes. And for me, it's like we're all a product of our experiences in some way, right? And at Turing, like our culture is one of speed, continuous improvement, and an obsession over the customer experience. Speed, continuous improvement, and obsession over customer experience. And I would say the continuous improvement piece is something that's very core to me. Like every day, I try to think about ways to be a little bit better than I was the day before. I have an app on my phone where I track whether I'm working on my own self-improvement every day.
What is the app name?
It's a silly app. The app just helps you track habits, and you can have certain habits that you want to work on every day. And for me, like working on my continuous improvement, staying up to speed with the latest in machine learning research, talking to my parents is all like part of the habits that I want to pursue every day. And that culture.
So is that the same hobby that you track, same habit that you track every day, or you have new things added on once you develop this habit?
It's the same, and the app is called Streaks, Streaks, and you get a little endorphin rush when you are on a streak, right? You don't want to break your streak, so you have to keep doing that every day. Okay. So it's a little bit like that. And so at Turing, we have that same culture of continuous improvement where we reflect every week on what worked well, what didn't work well, and what are we going to do about the things that didn't work well. So every week we have an all hands where we reflect on the same 3 things as a company. And this culture of focusing on what didn't work well that we should work on to get better has served us very well. And in some ways that we spoke about practicality, but in some ways that's the pragmatism of not, for lack of a better word, being complacent and always being hungry, always being maybe it's a little bit of my roots in machine learning too. It's about climbing the gradient,
Yeah.
taking the slope of the function and stepping in the direction of steepest ascent all the time. And that makes us reflect and keep getting better. And even our philosophy of distributed teams, like we evolved that through mistakes and experience that we had. Okay, this worked well, so let's do more of that. This didn't work well, let's do less of that. And always iterating, always evolving, always improving. And it's
Go ahead.
yeah. The challenge with that is you have to balance that with a sense of positivity and optimism, because sometimes when you're always focusing on how to improve, how to get better, it can feel like you're being too negative. I have to catch myself not doing that and just sometimes reflect and be happy with all the things that are going well and not always think about what could go better.
Is that also one of the habit, reflecting on what's going well? That's also one of the habit.
It is one of the habits.
How many are you I'm just curious, like how many are you tracking right now? If you
about
don't mind,
6.
like, what are the things that you're tracking right now? Yeah.
So about 6. It's pretty basic. Like it's this feels very personal, but I will tell you what.
Okay. You can tell the part that you want to tell. You don't need to tell the part you don't want to tell. That's okay. Yeah.
That sounds good.
Maybe just a few examples.
So keep up to speed with the latest in machine learning, which of course is important for Turing, because Turing uses machine learning for vetting and matching talent. So that's one of them. The second was working on my own self-improvement, which I spoke about. The third is talking to my parents. Like my parents live in India, and I want to make sure I'm an only kid, so I want to make sure I'm talking to them.
Oh, me too. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's weird. And as founders, like you get busy and you have to make sure you spend time with family. Then there's floss. Just floss your teeth. Very basic. And then there is do some physical activity. And I'm very bad with taking care of my health. And my wife is much, much better than me at physical fitness and things like that. So I try to take a leaf out of her book and make sure that I'm going for a walk and seeing the sunlight and not huddled in my cave all day. So physical activity, that was one of them. And then like positivity. And I have some exercises to think of. To just remember all the good things in my life from a personal standpoint, from a professional standpoint, so that I balance the need to keep improving, keep getting better with a little bit of a sense of gratitude for where we are today.
I recently heard there's a 3-to-1. Have you heard about the positive to negative 3-to-1 ratio?
Yes.
I heard there's yeah. So I try to do that now too.
That's great. That's great. That's great. That is right. When I was at Stanford, I tried to start 2 companies. They were more like 2 projects, I would say, like 6 months each. And first startup was Rover, the machine learning company that I mentioned that I started with my co-founder. And for a brief while, I was a machine learning scientist at PowerSet, the natural language search company that was acquired by Microsoft to become a part of Bing. And I was also a part of Rev Content, the company that acquired Rover for a period of time. But you're right, like I haven't really worked at a large company for a long period of time. And yeah, like that's kind of interesting. And you, Xiaoyun, like you've been at Instagram.
3 years. 3 years. I work for other people longer than you do.
Yes. You have more work experience than I do.
But do you always know that you don't want to work for anybody else? Or that was more just after your first year working for someone else, that was like miserable, you never want to do this again? No, you always know that when you're young.
For me, when I came to Stanford, like I came with the idea of doing my PhD and in machine learning. And then I got excited by the idea of building companies. Like I was seeing like how Google was built, how YouTube was built. And these were all like, I was inspired by all these technical founders who built these really valuable companies. And I just got smitten by the entrepreneurial bug, right? Like the radioactive entrepreneurial spider that roams around Silicon Valley and Stanford, Berkeley campuses. And with the benefit of hindsight, like for example, our daughter, Ella, if I were to give her advice on whether to start immediately or to work somewhere, I would probably suggest that she take a path similar to yours, Xiaoyun, where she works somewhere for a couple of years, like ideally a company that's known for a great product and engineering culture, or a high growth startup. Work there for like maybe 3 years or so, and then start your own company. I would not suggest doing what I did, which is start off without any experience, because I feel like there are some certain good lessons you can learn by being managed by a great manager that helps you be a great manager and a good boss too. And I kind of had to learn that through trial and error. And I feel like my learning rate could have been faster if and my first company, that when I said in the first 4 years of the company, I made every first time founder mistake imaginable. Like I think part of it is just your own maturity and your own level of experience, right? Like I was a kid, and maybe I'm still a little bit of a kid, but I was even more of a kid then.
More of a kid, that's good. But I guess I'm curious, like after your first exit, that was you said that was a successful exit. So then, what brings you to the second company? Is there a certain level of success that you feel like you haven't achieved? Where does the
Absolutely.
motivation for the second venture come after the first one? Yeah.
Absolutely. Like I feel like in my first company, it was a good acquisition, but I had a much bigger ambition for the kind of value that I wanted to create. And like I grew up being inspired by companies like Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, etc. I wanted to build a company of that scale. And I did it first. Sure, like the common shareholders made money, investors made money, but it wasn't like a giant sort of success, right? I wanted to build an incredibly valuable company that could be an iconic company that lasts for decades and has enduring value. And I felt like in my first startup, I learned a lot. I learned a lot of lessons from my experience, and I wanted to apply that to my second company with the benefit of all the the scar tissue that you accumulate. And I feel like founders who go through that journey, it's unique. It's if you only see success, I don't think you learn the right lessons. And if you only see failure, you don't learn the right second. If you only see failure, if your company fails, you probably won't start another company again. Unfortunately, you should try, but unfortunately, that's the bias. But if you've only seen success, like if your first company is a rocket ship, I feel like you are overconfident and you overfit. Again, me being a machine learning engineer, I try to think about the machine learning way of describing it. You overfit based on what you fit false patterns. But I was fortunate to have had, I would say, a grueling experience, including one with a near death experience, and then we were able to make the company successful. So there I learned my ambition was stoked to the optimal degree to build something bigger, where you've tasted some success, but you're hungry for more, right? And you can do it, and you want to take what you've learned and apply that to the next company. And I've been fortunate to have a wonderful team around me that starts with my co-founder and a great exec team. So it's just fun. And
seems like you're on track for this one to reach what you wanted to reach.
I don't know. I don't know about that. I think the history will be the judge of that. But I'm definitely having more fun than my first company.
Maybe because of the everyday gratitude, right? That helps.
I think that helps too.
Okay, maybe just last sentence. Like, what do you have right now? The economy is complicated. The world is complicated. What's your advice for someone who maybe want to start a company but think, oh, right now the time is so complicated. What should I do? What would be a recommendation for those type of people?
So I think when you start a company, it should all start with figuring out the right problem to solve that has a big enough market. And if you get that, and in my first company, the biggest mistake I did was not picking a problem that was big enough. And it was Mark Andreessen who had this quote that markets that don't exist don't care how smart you are. And if you pick the right problem, if you pick the right market, I think today is a wonderful time to start a company too. And maybe the valuations won't be as great as it would have been 1 year ago, but that's irrelevant. Like you can raise on safes at increasing valuation caps and keep going, so you don't dilute yourself too much. I feel like the good thing about starting a company now is there will be high signal to noise ratio in terms of the kind of investors you work with and the kind of co-founders and early team members you won't be attracting the fair weather startup partners now. Like now it will be the people who want to do it because they really want to build some wonderful companies and they have that itch. I feel like 2021, 2020, like when everything is frothy, like everybody wants to be a founder, everybody wants to be an investor, everybody wants to raise a fund. There's like too much noise. Now I feel like I think the wheat is separated from the chaff. If I found a founder who was looking to start a company, I'm more likely to invest in that founder today than I would have 1 year ago, because I know that this founder has the grit and the ambition and the right level of fearlessness. And you have to be fearless, right, to start a company if you're starting it today. So to the founders who are building today, I think it's a wonderful time to build, and you'll attract great people, great partners. The not so good investors are probably not investing right now. They're probably all pausing, and those are not the people you want. If people are so swayed by what's going on in the S&P 500, do you really want them? I'm fortunate to work with some wonderful investors from Foundation Capital West, where I feel like the way they think, the way they act, the way they talk nothing's changed from 2020 to 2021 to 2022. I have the same type of conversations with them. They were not super like like nothing's changed, right? It's because in reality nothing's changed. Like the world is going to get better through technology, and that requires people to build great companies and hire great people, and those things haven't changed.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. This is really inspiring, really fun as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for having me.
Okay, yeah, thank you.